to talk about the Starship Enterprise versus the Millennium Falcon, ambitious projects in Drupal 8. And what it means to build an ambitious project in Drupal 8 when you are smaller than the Fortune 500 or some large international organization. In honor of George Lucas, I'm going to skip the traditional opening credits. You'll see those at the end if you want to know more about me. We're just going to jump right in. And I think a lot of times it's quite helpful when you're trying to understand where we are today to go back in time and to see both how and why Drupal is where it is today and why we are facing some of the issues we are. So way back in 91, about a quarter century ago, space travel was invented. The World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee at the CERN laboratories invents this thing called the World Wide Web. And the browser, people start building primitive ships and taking them on simple missions. And at this point, there are very few rules in terms of how that is happening. That quickly led to what I call the first space race, roughly 1991 to 1993. There were small factions of nerds and academics and people in government offices literally inventing these spaceships in this new world. And a lot of them had some very ambitious goals, and it was sort of fairly obvious immediately how powerful this new galaxy was. CERN, this was the very first website ever built by Tim Berners-Lee, and it was ambitious right from the beginning. Universal access to a large universe of documents. And we now, of course, know that it's universal access to the sum of human knowledge in some ways. Very early on, people, again, very ambitious sites where this was, I think, 1993, late 93, people started realizing they could use these tools to do something very cool and suddenly talk about every movie ever made and have the central place. Sharing music. Suddenly you could sit on your computer in 1994 and listen to music that you may have never heard before. And again, these are, at this point, basically geeks building these little spaceships, ambitious spaceships, shooting around the galaxy. More geeks started to organize it all. 1994, the first version of Yahoo, no logo, no nothing, sort of trying to organize this galaxy. Again, academics. MTV.com, one of the first corporate domains ever registered, but it was not registered by MTV. It was registered by VJ Adam Curry, who decided that he would become the spokesman of MTV and take this little ship out and write about culture. And within a year, he was sued by MTV for that domain. And so in a lot of ways, this, by the way, is the original Millennium Falcon. This was the original design before we have the hamburger shape that we all know and love. This was it. And in a lot of ways, this space race was this period, these freighter ships, sort of clunky ships moving around the galaxy, doing ambitious things. This then led to what I call anarchy, 94 to 96. By the end of 94, there are 10,000 websites. 18% of them are .coms, larger sites. 100,000 sites by the end of 95. 50% of them are .coms. Exponential growth by 96, over 500,000 sites, and almost 70% of them are .com. Also in this same time period, Netscape was released. It was the first sort of popular browser that took off from Mosaic, and we could see images on the web. And as a result, everyone started building all these spaceships, including the Enterprise. 1994, IBM and Microsoft, two of the first biggest, what we would traditionally consider an enterprise, building sort of a big site, a big spaceship in this new galaxy. Amazon appeared in 1994, and suddenly you can have an account and buy a book on this spaceship. Pizza Hut, you could order a pizza in 1994 and have it delivered in Santa Barbara, California. Again, suddenly Hotwired, the first site ever in 1994 to sell what we now know as banner ads, placed nicely down in the bottom of their website. And in the same period, by the end of 1996, Netscape has an IPO. On the first day, their share price tripled in value. By the end of the day, they were valued at over $3 billion and had never made a single cent of profit. And I'm not sure they ever did. And suddenly things are very, very different than this sort of collective of geeks and nerds building the Internet Underground Music Archive. Suddenly, with all of these sites, the web is starting to look a lot more like the Enterprise, with bigger ships, bigger missions, and more ambition. This then, sort of out of that anarchy, I am calling sort of the rise of the Federation of Planets, where because of the Netscape IPO and the dot-com boom, suddenly there was all this money available for people to build bigger ships and bigger tools, and with all this funding and resources, sort of the house was out of the barn. And so some of the characteristics of these sites, unlike a lot of the early sites, vast money and resources. You had staffs, budgets. Instead of people hand-coding things in HTML and using CGI scripts, large companies quickly formed. This is all in the early 90s. Vignette, who is still a company, Interwoven is still a company. At this point in time, I worked for a company where Vignette came in and gave us a $250,000 bid just for the software. 2 consultants who would come out for 2 years at $100,000 a year to help you build it, and then ongoing support of something like $90,000 per year after that. This is very different than the early sites that people were hand-coding in their dorm rooms. The Fortune 500, e-commerce, startups, all sort of driven by these IPOs that were happening, and all this money, and the ambitions were getting bigger, and the sites were getting bigger, and again, the new tools, content management systems, started to appear. Around that same time, the Rebel Alliance, around 96, these people never went away. The people who were building these smaller, less ambitious sites are still there. They're collaborating. They're typically working with free and open source software, and they are also working to build bigger and better ships with bigger and better tools, largely driven by Linux, which was by 96 powering vast portions of the web. It was invented almost in response to the enterprise. It used to be that you had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a Unix license. Suddenly, you had the tools to do this, and there was a lot of energy around that in the early 90s, which led to PHP Nuke, which I have always considered sort of the first widely available, widely known open source content management system. There were others, but this was the one that people really first started talking about. And suddenly, there's this tool that I could give to you to go build your own spaceship. A very ambitious spaceship at the time. Things like accounts and voting and commenting. Very quickly, drop 1.0, which if you don't know your history, this was what led to the very first version of Drupal. Again, this is all going on simultaneously while these IPOs are happening and the enterprise is going crazy, and then that leads us right into the Big Bang. By the early 2000s, there were dozens of these systems, including Drupal and Joomla and WordPress, I believe, is on here. All free for people like you and me who could go click a download file, unload a zip file, maybe change a few configuration passwords, and you have this thing where suddenly you are out there building your own ship. Freely available, easy to use. And in a lot of cases, at this point in time, a lot of this software was building ships that were more powerful and more flexible than some of the big enterprise solutions that were available at the time. Which leads us to the new hope. The nerds start coming back and discovering that Big Bang and all of this software, and they start building ever more ambitious sites. I don't know how many people remember Dean Space. Howard Dean was running for the presidential election in 2004. I love this, by the way. Josh Kay and Zach are now both founders of Pantheon. But in 2003, they started this idea based on Drupal called Dean Space, and they built the first Drupal distribution, and they began distributing it out to others across the country, and individual groups started building their own Dean Spaces and empowering people, and this was this hugely ambitious thing, and it was how I first heard of Drupal and how I believe a lot of people first heard of Drupal, because this was in the news. It was a phenomenon. If you weren't there at that time, it was like it was the first real election being directly affected by technology, and people were going crazy over it. I believe Drupal's traffic statistics rose by 300% shortly after this happened. Linux Journal, other popular sites, built-in Drupal, Ecademy, 2004, which was really the first version of LinkedIn, and there's a long backstory on this where they forked Drupal and went off on their way, but again, building these very ambitious things in this free piece of software called Drupal. Now Public, another, trying to revolutionize the news. Again, voting, commenting, all built in early Drupal. 2005, right around this time, Drupal will make more inroads on companies, governments, public institutions like schools, universities, open source projects, and, most of all, non-professionals. This was on, Dries does a yearly predictions post at the end of the year where he predicts what's happening for the next year. At the end of 2005, this was his prediction. Things were looking pretty great. NASA was using Drupal at this point. Greenpeace, NATO, the Onion, the United Nations, nonprofits, education, government, and to a large extent still a lot of hobbyists, small businesses. Drupal is sort of powering lots of things right now in the Federation a little bit, some enterprisey type stuff, but lots of other things. And there's largely, peace in the galaxy at this point. The Dean Stream. I'm going to play this. Does anyone remember the Dean Stream?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, can you print that?
South Carolina, and Oklahoma, and Arizona, and North Dakota, and New Mexico.
Ah, it's not playing.
We're going to California, and Texas, and New York. And we're going to South Dakota, and Oregon, and Washington, and Michigan. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House.
I play that because that is truly, if you were there, that's how people were feeling about Drupal at the time. It was like, wow, NATO and the UN, and it's, we're going places.
Ah, the days when that could end a presidential election.
Yes. However, around this time, because of that very fact, you could now walk into a meeting and say, NATO is using Drupal, and NASA is using Drupal. The Federation, this larger collective of sites with money and resources, starts to discover this, and they're noticing that all of these, very powerful, ambitious spaceships flying through the galaxy are being built in Drupal and other open source software. Now we're up to 2007. Lullabot builds MTV. You can now walk in MTV UK. So this is still sort of not MTV, but it's like, wow, MTV is using Drupal, and you can now walk into a meeting and say, MTV. AOL, at the time, a still fairly giant corporation, and it wasn't AOL.com. It was dev.aol.com. The smart people were using Drupal inside of AOL. Warner Brothers Music, Lifetime Television Network. Suddenly these are starting to look a lot more enterprisey. And then in 2007, Acquia appears on the scene and raises $7 million in their Series A round. And right here, wow, that's a lot of money. It's really not. But this is all happening sort of simultaneously. All these big sites are appearing. Nike. Whoops, what happened to what did I do here? I feared this would happen.
It's a delayed effect of the Dean Scream.
Use the force.
Why do I not? How did I just lose my entire display here? This is not going well.
What's your presentation tool?
Reveal.js. And I have speaker notes, and it went blank, and suddenly that went blank, and I do not know why here.
Let's try and refresh.
Bear with me here, because I'm going to...
Just hold it down. Just turn it on.
I don't have time for this. We have a lot to cover here. Okay, we've been through this. Leanspace, Linux Journal, Academy. The Dean Stream. Horizon Federation. Okay, here's where we were, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to wing this without my speaker notes because I don't want to break this, so this will be interesting. So again, this is all happening simultaneously. Nike, FedEx, we're talking Fortune 100 companies now. The Grammy Awards, one of the biggest cultural institutions in America, 2009. And then the big one, the White House. Does anyone remember this? Again, now here's where you really could walk into a meeting and say, all right, the software we're proposing, runs the White House, okay? It's secure, it's big it can do this. And it was, a significant deal at the time. And now we're really looking like the modern day enterprise where we have this funded public company supporting Drupal and the White House is running it and Nike and all these giant companies. Which leads us directly into the dark side, the 2009 to the present. The Federation continues to grow. Acquia continues to raise money. Bigger and bigger sites keep coming out. Drupal 7 comes out in 2011, and shortly after that, people start working on Drupal 8. And this changed a lot of things, starting with Symfony. So the guts of Drupal 7 were basically ripped out and replaced with Symfony to handle all of these things that Drupal used to do. It was a very huge, it was basically just a complete gutting of Drupal, a very big, significant decision that made things quite a bit more complicated. Sort of by default, that meant we were suddenly using object-oriented programming. This is a page updated on June 2017 for developers, background and prerequisites for learning Drupal 8. Object-oriented programming is the very first prerequisite, and initially daunting, and it is for programmers. I know from experience because I came from a procedural background and have had to go through this struggle myself, so suddenly very complicated and daunting. Oops. Configuration management. An essential operation when building and managing Drupal sites, especially when building and maintaining large enterprise sites. Again, this is this big sort of complicated thing that was added on to Drupal that we had all known and loved. Composer, again, 2017. Composer is used as a package manager that, again, a very, very different way than we were used to of building Drupal. Instead of downloading a tarball or running a drush command, you suddenly have this very confusing, powerful tool that is still in 2017. They're very strange bedfellows. I get tripped up by Composer to this day frequently. Again, just sort of bigger, more complicated. And here we are, 5 years after our previous quote. This is an interview that Dries gave in Computer World. I think we just need to say we're more about big sites. With Drupal 8, he concluded, I really think we can say we have built the best CMS for enterprise systems. A full 180-degree turn from where we were 5 years ago when, if you recall that quote, it wasn't like end developers, it was like, most importantly, non-professionals. Now here we are with the best system for enterprise CMS. GE appears on the scene, Fortune 10 at that time, I believe, Whole Foods, 7-Eleven. By this point, in 2015, Acquia has raised $55 billion in their Series G round and are now, I believe, north of $200 million in funding. And at Baltimore, Dries put up this slide during his keynote. These are all big, giant, corporate enterprise sites that are launching on Drupal 8. And this was presented sort of as a point of pride, and frankly it is. Here's a tweet from Jeff Eaton, Drupal luminary, shortly after that, in fact, right at that session, saying it's the great admission that the actual audience choices have been made over the last few years. Sad that was denied. Well choices were being made, meaning there was a lot of sort of controversy over this whole period of Drupal, and I think his point was, okay, finally, someone has admitted this, that Drupal is, this great thing for enterprise sites. So, sort of in response to all of these complications, a rebellion forms very early on. CHX or Chex, I always never, does anyone know? I've always wondered, is it Chex, CHX? Very prominent Drupal developer. I see Nate's in the room here, he's about to come up. And there were some other issues with CHX, but nonetheless, a lot of it was due to sort of some of the technical decisions that were being made in Drupal. Quick sketch, sitting over right here. After much contemplation and frustration, the system that I love or enjoy, I would like to remove my responsibilities of maintaining future versions of Drupal core. My current perspective on it leaves me hopeless. Again, a very prominent, well-respected member of the Drupal community who's sitting right here and said, you know what, I'm done. Which led to Backdrop, a CMS co-founded by Nate and Jen Lampton. This was her introductory post, again, right around the same time, 2013. I love working with Drupal. blah, blah, blah. But I'm worried that the hackers may no longer find Drupal approachable, and we may not get many more self-taught Drupal experts. Full-on rebellion. I'm just looking at my time here. Okay, I'm doing okay. This is a recent Reddit post, but representative of posts that had happened throughout this whole period. Am I the only developer frustrated with development in Drupal 8? This is 1 year ago. The answer is no. There's about 3,000 replies to this with people complaining about how hard it is to learn all of these things and Composer and dependency injection and all this sort of madness. It's all just so heavy. People are sort of, the workers are complaining. This is a tweet from 2 days ago. This is Earl Miles, developer of Views and Panels, and in my opinion, sort of one of the people that really made Drupal what it is, responding. And ironically enough, there's a backdrop tweet right above it. I didn't even notice that before. Someone complaining about their frustration of Drupal development, and Earl Miles saying, is it the 5-year release cycle, or is it that we're doing this extremely ambitious refactor with poorly researched premises? Earl, by the way, and I don't believe it was because of what was happening, but he has basically stepped away from Drupal at this point also. So, the Federation moves into public relations mode in response to all of this sort of crisis. Early on, Acquia was accused not of only driving Drupal toward all of these sort of changes so that they could better serve that enterprise market, they were sort of being accused of sucking up all of the Drupal talent and hiring everybody that used to be maybe off building these less ambitious sites for non-giant corporations. His answer was, no, we're not. Matthew Tift, who I don't think he's in the room, but he's here at this conference, works for Lullabot. Again, this is, the blogosphere was going crazy with all these articles, and he says, what it really comes down to is Drupal 8 built for the enterprise? Yes, Drupal 8 is built with the enterprise needs in mind. Yes, Acquia contributes a great deal of time. I don't think these facts are in dispute. But then he goes on to say, well, it is for the enterprise. It's okay. We're all going to be okay. Larry Garfield, not at this camp, but has been to previous camps, made the point that the same thing happened at Drupal 5, Drupal 6, Drupal 7. People have always complained like, this is getting more complicated. But the fact is, we are building bigger, more ambitious ships with it. And these are not Acquians. These are just all sort of Drupal community members sort of responding to this idea that, hey, Drupal has left the regular people behind. Similar article from Alex Pott at chapter 3. I'll sort of zoom past that one for now. And finally, in Drupal 2016, 3 years after saying that we've built the best CMS for enterprise system, Dries posts this blog post that says, Drupal is for ambitious digital experiences. And could we read down, he would start talking about there's this perception that we've just seen that Drupal is for the enterprise, but that's not the right word. How about it's for ambitious digital experiences? And he goes on to sort of outline why Drupal 8 is so well suited for that. And he reiterates that again in Baltimore DrupalCon. If you want to build a small website, I'm not sure it makes sense to use Drupal today. It's good for ambitious sites. So this is sort of the new messaging around a lot of this controversy and crises that had been rollicking the galaxy. So that gets us to sort of the heart of our talk here, which is what really is an ambitious site. Can you still use Drupal to build an ambitious site? Should you still use it to do so? If you look at this, the Millennium Falcon is this little tiny speck in size, but I would make the argument that the Millennium Falcon, throughout its illustrious history, is every bit ambitious as the Starship Enterprise, just on very different scales. Okay, now it's going to start hurting me here that I don't have my speaker notes, but I'm going to keep moving. So, so we back at that graph, we sort of know this idea of what the enterprise is, right? And what a truly ambitious enterprise site means. It typically has a design team, a development team, a front-end UX team, content, marketing, DevOps, quality assurance, a performance team, typically an IT staff, Drupal admins pressing all the buttons. There's typically one or more project managers, often R&D. There are leaders and captains, giant staff, big, lots of resources, and big ambitions. We sort of know this, generally speaking, to be sort of what people would consider the enterprise. And of course, the Enterprise is so big they have a mental health counselor. You would never find a mental health counselor on the Millennium Falcon. So, what will you find on the Millennium Falcon? How is the, they're both equally ambitious, they're both spaceships flying through the galaxy going on missions. What's the difference? You have Han Solo, you have Chewbacca, and big ambitions. And in the case of the Enterprise, that's it. They have a minimum crew size of 2 people. 2 people. So, now we get into the crux of our talk. We know that they're both ambitious, but they're very different. Much fewer resources. They don't have this federation supporting them. So the question becomes, how and if do you build your own Millennium Falcon in Drupal 8 to save the galaxy? We're going to go through a 10-point flight plan talking about the various, what I believe are requirements for any organization to do this, and to see where people will fall off and where they won't. So, okay. The first thing, of course, that you need is ambition, right? It would make no sense to build a site in Drupal 8 or Backdrop or WordPress if you don't have some ambition that's going to get you moving. And by ambition, I in particular mean a specific mission, a goal, something that you're trying to accomplish. Preparing for the unexpected, adapting to change, dreaming for the future. And if you don't have a mission, you're doing this wrong, and it's not going to matter if you use Drupal 8 or any other system. You have to have sort of this defined mission. And if you're trying to build an ambitious site, you need ambition. It's pretty straightforward. And I bring it up because a lot of people don't. A lot of people will spend money and resources on a website because they should, but there's no real ambition behind it. And if you're picking Drupal 8 in that scenario, you have made a bad decision. My daughter found this horse camp about an hour and a half north of here up by Taylor's Falls, and I had to go pick her up. And I went to the website to get a map or something, and there's no address under contact. The site has no ambition, and this guy would be much better off with a land speeder. Squarespace, Weebly, something that he doesn't have to manage. He has a very simple mission. All he needs to do is give me the map. He's failing at it. But a Weebly site would probably help him, get a map up there for me. And to give a single guy running a horse camp in northern Minnesota a Drupal 8 site would be a crime against humanity. It's absurd. So ambition. The second thing you need is a plan. Now, as I go through these, we talked earlier, we've got Han Solo and Chewbacca. We don't have a DevOps team and a planning and discovery team and researchers. All of these things could, in theory, be done by Han and Chewie or a small team, but it's something that you need to do and account for in terms of costs and efforts and sort of, as you're building your ship, you need to make sure that you have developers who are going to, get the ship together for you, and designers who are going to, make it look good and comfortable, project managers to sort of, map out your flight plan, QA team to make sure your ship's not going to blow up. These are all very real things that no matter how small you are, you're going to need if you want to have an ambitious mission. If you don't have them, you'll end up with false starts, a ship that does something you don't need it to do, and ultimately a failed mission. So even if it's you and Chewie, sitting at a bar, mapping this out, it's, the effort has to be there, whether you're small or big or using Drupal 8 or Backdrop or anything else. You need excellent pilots. So it doesn't necessarily matter who it is, but somebody. I've been working with clients and on client websites for just south of 25 years. The ones that work have a good pilot. It's not me, it's not the developer or the company that we hire, it's the person managing that site, flying the spaceship through the galaxy, and they have to care. And oftentimes a organization will build a website for, say, the marketing department, but they're too busy and there is no pilot driving this thing. And again, it's not going to matter if it's Drupal 8 or any other system. You need someone who's willing to take risks or be direct or lead by example. It just has to be someone driving that ship. And in particular with Drupal 8, it's a lot different driving a Drupal 8 spaceship than it is driving a Squarespace spaceship. You need a qualified, capable pilot who cares. Bad pilots, they often fly around like they're in a land speeder. You give them the Millennium Falcon and you charge a lot of money for it, and they don't quite get the power of it and are sort of stumbling around the galaxy with this very powerful ship that they know nothing about. Often that's lack of resources or lack of passion and goals. And often it means, like the Millennium Falcon, your ship ends up in a junkyard with no support and no longer able to fly or complete missions. You need a capable crew. Again, this is not the developers, the operations team that we talked about earlier. These are the people sitting next to you, flying your ship. So again, the Millennium Falcon, it can fly with one. There's a scene in The Force Awakens where when Rey is stealing the ship, there's no one in Chewbacca's seat. It's her flying it, and she's struggling. But to hit this button, she's reaching over because she can't reach it. I mean, it can be done, but you really need 2 people to fly the Millennium Falcon well, at a minimum. Meaning, if you are a small organization working on Drupal 8, you need some type of crew. It cannot just be yourself. It can, but that would be a very rare individual. The Millennium Falcon's base crew, realistically, it's 4. They've got the pilot and the co-pilot, and they have the 2 turrets where the gunners sit. If you're on a risky mission, you even need a little bit more than that. And the extended crew, there's a room in the Millennium Falcon that holds an engineer. A full crew has 5 or 6 people, all manning various things, and in some way or another, that crew is essential to your success. And I said in my presentation intro or on the TC Drupal site that you absolutely need your own Chewbacca, minimum. Like, again, unless you are a freak of nature, you need someone in that role helping you. And they have to be experienced and have the knowledge. And this is a very clear place where you outsource that. If you're a small group, you need it. You might not have it, but you have to have a crew helping you. If you don't, lack of resources. Oh, that's a bad slide from earlier before. A support team. Again, this is not the operations team who helped plan this. This is not the pilot or the crew. This is the people helping your ship when it crashes. There's a few things that you can do on your own, but your hyperdrive is going to break. You have core and module updates to do, bug fixes and repairs. Again, outsource this if required, but these are, in particular with Drupal 8, this is not an easy job, and it's something that needs, if you are a small organization of any kind, you cannot ignore this. You need that support team, whether you outsource it and that's almost always the case. With no support, like the Millennium Falcon, your ship ends up in a graveyard. Continuous improvement. So, if you know the history of the Millennium Falcon, you would know that it started out 90 years before the first Star Wars, which is actually the fourth Star Wars. It was a freighter ship for 90 years before people began modifying it. Heavily modified engine. They replaced the stock hyperdrive, and they hacked that replaced hyperdrive into a ship that was twice as fast as most Galaxy ships. Upgraded weaponry, shields, cargo bins. In the case of the Millennium Falcon, on these ambitious missions that it went on, these continuous improvements were absolutely critical to these missions. The Millennium Falcon would never be able to do what it did if people were not continuously, over time, adding to it as the scope of the missions increased. The ship itself needed to be modified to do that. So if you are, again, a small organization with big ambitions, you're not going to put up a site that does this one little thing and then forget about it, because that's not ambitious. If you are going to do that, you don't need Drupal 8. Outsource if required. If you don't do this, again, you can't keep up, and you'll end up not being able to complete your new missions as they grow. Infrastructure, star bases and fuel. You need, presumably some sort of fuel to fly your ship and a place to park it and fix it. And in Drupal 8, this often means DevOps and environments, staging servers and development servers and production servers and deployments, backup, security, denial of service. The good news for this one is that virtually any organization can now have access to this at a price that even 10 years ago was prohibitively expensive for a small organization. In particular, things like DevOps and setting up proper workflow environments and this infrastructure. So this is something that is now very attainable for a small organization, but it is yet another absolute requirement for you to launch an ambitious site in Drupal. It has to be done, and the costs and resources for that have to be accounted for. If you don't have it, again, You won't complete your missions. Improvisation. I bring this one up because, again, throughout history, the way the Millennium Falcon has succeeded is by finding ways to take something that isn't working right and get it working right. The example that I can think of, I can't remember what's on my slides here. So change strategies, make compromises, and wing it. If you recall, when the Millennium Falcon is, he improvises and he's flying through the asteroid field, and they're about to get away and the hyperdrive breaks. It's like, oh, Jesus. And so they fly back and attach themselves to the, I believe it was the Death Star, and they did a garbage dump, and he sort of floated off into the ether and escaped Darth Vader in a sea of garbage, and he was improvising. And in particular, if you are small, you sort of need some of that mentality, similar to taking risks. You know, you are not GE or Nike with teams of developers who can just make sure everything's perfect. You know, you might be working with experimental modules, trying things in Drupal 8 to you know, sort of extend your missions and do greater things, and you're going to get damaged. The Millennium Falcon is notorious for flying with, you know, giant gaping holes in its hull, and you know, things don't always go right, but yet they succeed because they are taking some risks. And finally, a little bit of the Force. Oops, I lost. I had a quote here about what the Force actually is, which is basically this unifying force in the universe that gives people their power. Anyone who's worked with any version of Drupal knows that there are times when everything I just said prior to this are out the window, and you simply need a little bit of the Force to figure things out. And then, I think that's particularly true with Drupal 8. However, not all humans, or not all creatures, are susceptible to the Force. Han Solo in particular, this is a quote I got off of, I believe, the Wikipedia website, where he was known for flying by feel and dialing down his compensators to 95% so that he could actually feel the G-forces of his ship in a way that most pilots were not doing. And if you are a small group trying to tackle these big missions, you're going to need a little bit of that. And so you may have noticed that virtually every single point that I gave on that 10-point flight plan had nothing to do with Drupal 8. Maybe, you know, I think I had one slide where it said you need Drupal 8 expertise for your developers, but the Drupal 8 is not your limiting factor. In almost all cases, if you have those sort of 10 requirements that I just ran through, you are going to be able to do an ambitious project, whether it's in Drupal 8 or Backdrop or any other CMS. And this is a quote, look, I want you to take her. I mean it, take her. You need all the help you can get. She's the fastest ship in the fleet. If your ambitions are big, and if you can meet all those requirements that I just went through and acknowledge that, you know, you're not flying the Starship Enterprise, but you are flying a spaceship, right? It's not, you're not driving around a toy car. It's this big thing that's flying across the galaxy, and it's going to need all of those things that I just mentioned. However, if you have all of those things and your ambitions are big, I believe that Drupal 8 is still the fastest ship in the fleet, and it can make a very wise choice. And what it really comes down to is your pilot and your crew and your partners and your ambitions. And if you have all those pieces, you know, Drupal 8 just might be the place that you land. So, good. I was hoping to finish at, I went a little fast because I lost my speaker notes, as you know, but I was hoping to finish at 4:45 or 5 minutes early. My name is Tim. I am the co-founder and technical director of Electric Citizen. We build Millennium Falcons for small organizations using Drupal 8 and Drupal 7 and other tools. My presentation software, which ended up choking on me, is Reveal.js. I called it out here because I love it so much, despite our glitch today. And most of my research was filled with many millions of nerds talking about Star Trek and the Millennium Falcon on the internet. So that's it, building ambitious websites in Drupal 8. And we do have, you know, I know it's 4:30 at the end of a long conference, but I'm happy to take questions if people have them. Otherwise, happy to let everyone go enjoy the waning hours of the day. All right.
Are we supposed to, which would win in a fight?
Oh, that's what we should do with our time here. Hold on. Let's see here. That's not where I want to be. All right. Let's see here. I purposely took these clips. Do I even have them in here? I'm going to turn the recorder off here because no one needs to be.